Rogers was a fourth grader and a Bluebird, which is a younger member of the Camp Fire Girls of America, as well as a 9-year-old whose only goal on March 6, 1959 was to sell the 7 boxes of mints she had to those within her neighborhood. After a few hours, her parents started to call for her. As they searched for her, they became more concerned. That's when the neighbors soon joined in on the search. Finally, with no luck, the police were then contacted and began their own search. The whereabouts of little Candy was still unknown as night fell. There were abandoned boxes of the mints that Candy was selling found by the Fort George Wright Bridge, however, no sign of little Candice. The morning of March 7th, the newspapers had already started to report of the little girl's disappearance. Major search groups began, including the Air Force, Marine Corps Reserve Unit, WWP, Inland Paper, International Harvester, U.S. Postal Service, and Boy Scouts of America also offered their assistance in finding Candice Rogers. The community came together and sent in checks to help with reward money, swelling the reward total in the Candice Elaine Rogers case to $2,240 in 1959, which is roughly $22,808.71 in 2022 dollars. As the search continued, there was a horrific accident with the Sikorsky H-19 Chickasaw helicopter. That helicopter, while searching by the Spokane River, hit a power line and crashed. Sadly, the crash claimed the lives of 3 of the 5 Air Force airmen it was carrying. They were Airman Marlis D. Ray, Staff Sergeant William M. McDonnell, and LT Kenneth G. Fodek. On day 15 of the search, there was a pair of kids' shoes confirmed to belong to Candy Rogers found by 2 people who were out hunting in the area. Day 16 brought an ending to the search for Candy Rogers, but not the way the community and her family hoped. Her tiny innocent body was concealed purposefully by branches and pine needles. Investigators were able to determine that she was strangled and restrained by strips of her clothing. They were also able to tell that she had been SV. The investigation went from a search looking for a kidnapper to looking for a child predator as well as child killer. Let's remember that back in 1959 there was no requirement for those who were sex offenders to register. So if the suspect was to be a serial rapist or serial murderer, we truly may never know. That requirement did not show up until the 1990s. Due to the fact that there was not a sex offender registry at the time, it was difficult to narrow down a possible suspect. Though they kept searching, the investigation began to span months, years, then sadly decades. Were there any leads or any type of tips called in, you may be asking? Absolutely, leads were called in all the time. However, those leads only brought countless persons of interest as they kept doing their investigation. But as they kept investigating those individuals, sadly, they began to be eliminated one by one. As the investigators continued to search for the killer, there became advancements in forensics and the extraction of DNA, etc. In the early 2000s, there was a breakthrough in which forensic scientists were able to isolate a sample of the suspect's DNA through the semen found on Candy's clothing. They ran that DNA profile through the combined DNA index system, which includes DNA profiles collected from crime scene evidence, convicted offenders, felony arrestees, missing persons, and unidentified human remains. Unfortunately, that search still left them with no further results. That came as a big blow because their leading suspect at the time was a man by the name of Hugh Morse. They ran the semen sample through the combined DNA index system which Morse was in, however the sample did not match his. He was already serving a life sentence for murders in 1959 and 1960. Morse died in jail in April 2003. After the DNA sample excluded Mr. Morse, the investigation, though still active and still open to any and all tips, sadly went many more years without anything new. In 2021, Spokane Police Department contacted Othram to see if its technologies and methods could produce anything new to assist within the case. The DNA from the crime scene was at this point 61 years old and had been burdened with non-human DNA and simply aged. Othram received the DNA in March of 2021 and were able to use forensic-grade genome sequencing to get a genealogical profile. Then forensic genealogists used that profile to search for distant genetic matches that may help in narrowing down the male that left the semen sample. Due to the DNA sample being semen, when Othram used their technology, they were able to come back to the Spokane Police Department with the name of 3 males who were siblings. As the Spokane Police Department continued their investigation into these 3 brothers, they found that they had all died but one who passed in 1970 at the age of 30, who committed suicide and left behind a wife and daughter. That was the lead that they needed. They connected the daughter of this potential suspect and asked if she would be willing to give a DNA sample that would narrow down if it was her father who had raped and strangled little Candice Rogers. The daughter agreed and provided a DNA swab, which showed strong paternity between the killer and the DNA found at the crime scene so many years earlier. Due to the strong evidence connection, a search warrant was given so that the Spokane Police Department could exhume the daughter's father, who had already passed, to check his DNA from that of the murderer. It came back as positively being him. It then concluded that John Rainhoff, never even a person of interest, was the person responsible for taking Candy Rogers' life. The only questions left are still the ones that were lingering 62 years ago. How did or did Hoff even know Candy Rogers? Or was he responsible for any other children or crimes in the area or elsewhere?